And yeah, we are live. So yeah, let me do the initials, I guess. So welcome, folks, to the Kubernetes Security Meetup. Last month, also we did a security, and we are continuing building on top of it. Uh, if you are new or first timer to this meetup, we do this on a monthly basis. Of course, before pandemic, this was an in-person meetup, but yeah, since then we have moved to online setup. But yeah, earlier we wouldn't have had Matt here, but thanks to being online, we have him here. And anyway, we do like a theme-based meetup every month. So this time it's security. Last time was also security, and every 3 to 4 months we do 101. So if there are people who are like first timers or onboarding to Kubernetes, that's a good place to start with. And apart from that, yeah, if you are on Twitter, we are KTSBLR. You can tweet tweet uh, tweet at us there. And while we are at it, like please follow the code of conduct of the meetup. And yeah, I guess if there is free meetup thing. Yeah, and if you're new to Kubernetes or haven't heard of the Kubernetes Slack, then go to this link and join the Kubernetes Slack. So you'll find everyone there, like everyone in the community working on any project that is anyhow related to Kubernetes. You'll find people there. So that's a great platform to be on. And yeah, from there I'll hand over to Matt, and so take it away.
Awesome, thank you, Suraj. Right, let's get this show on the road. So hopefully you folks are all seeing my screen. I know we did on the meetup. This was going to be the talk that I gave at Kubernetes Community Days about the kernel exploits in the kernel and Kubernetes. But I figured quite a lot of people might have seen that one, so I'd do something a bit different. So this is the talk that I'm going to be giving today about continuous security and how we can build security into our software development pipelines. So this is me. I'm Matt Jarvis. I'm a senior developer advocate at a company called Snyk. And Snyk are a cloud native application security company. So we build products around scanning all sorts of things within your software development lifecycle for vulnerabilities and remediation. I've been around open source for a long time, and I've kind of worked across all the different sides of the equation. So I've been an operator, I've been in development, DevOps, and obviously now security. So the kind of the story of the last decade or so in software development has really seen the boundaries of what is an application, what is operations, and what constitutes infrastructure becoming pretty blurred. The old view of the world, as we're seeing in this slide, was that the application was the only piece under the responsibility of the development team, and all other elements of that stack sat under IT operations, with security usually a step right at the end of the deployment process. So somebody else would be provisioning your VM, somebody else would be giving you your network, somebody else would be provisioning storage and all that kind of stuff. But the world we live in today is one where our infrastructure and our workloads are pretty much completely tied together. Everything's declared as code. Everything's software development practice, and there's really no difference between our workload, our containers, and the computing infrastructure that goes along with it. And by infrastructure, we don't just mean the underlying compute technology, but also the configuration, all the kind of operational policies that control those capabilities. And as a community of practitioners, we've discussed in a lot of detail over the last decade, I guess, this blurring and consuming of the boundaries between development and operations. But in lots of cases, we still haven't really considered how that impacts on how we model and practice security. In lots of organizations, security is still considered to be an external practice that somehow exists only when our applications are deployed and operational. But this is kind of unworkable in this era of continuous integration, continuous delivery. And as I showed in the last slide, development-driven teams now have responsibilities for most of the deployment stack. And so this gives those teams, our developers, a much greater responsibility for ensuring that those things are secure. So by the time our code and our infrastructure is deployed to production, it's really far too late to deal with the implications of security issues. And we can't slow down that development velocity to introduce security gates in the way that things used to work, because velocity and time to market for new features and things like that is clearly the differentiator for businesses to succeed. So that presents us with a set of unique challenges around security. How do we make sure our applications, our infrastructure secure when our working practices are evolving into these super fast delivery pipelines? Security still matters. And as we've seen repeatedly over the last few years, security breaches can have a really massive impact on businesses, both from a financial perspective in terms of impact on our bottom line and potential fines, but also on how trusted our customers see us as. And trust is really one of the key metrics for successful businesses in the cloud era. So let's start by taking a look at the different classes of things we probably need to be looking at to ensure that we've considered security properly in our workflows. So firstly, our applications, our workloads. And modern applications are usually composed of a relatively small core of homegrown code, along with a huge amount of code that's usually open source in terms of modules and libraries. And this is great news for application development, because the availability of modules and packages means we can get to develop applications faster. We can write less code. We don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time by solving the same problems over and over again. And anyone who develops in Java, in Python, in Node, in Go is going to recognize this pattern. And in all of these ecosystems, the number of vulnerabilities is growing. Now, this isn't necessarily because code is getting more insecure. It can be just that there's more modules being written, more code being created. And we're also getting better at working out what's vulnerable. But in the end, this all means more opportunities for those vulnerabilities to be exploited. And when we use modules and libraries in our code, each of the things that we bring in can have a very large dependency tree, both in terms of direct dependencies. So these are the ones that we know about directly that we're including in our code, but also indirect dependencies. So dependencies of dependencies. And this can potentially bring in a ton of other modules that we might not even be aware of, especially when we look at things like Node. I'm sure everybody who's ever programmed in Node knows about how many huge amounts of packages that can end up being included when we build our applications. And typically, nearly 80% of all security vulnerabilities are found in those indirect dependencies. And so indirect dependencies are ones that we have less control over, and we may not be aware of them at all. So as an example of that, here's an exploit from the Node community. This was introduced into NPM in 2018, this get cookies. This is supposedly a library to parse HTTP headers, but it's actually a remote code execution exploit. It's about 40 lines of code, processes remote JavaScript, executes it on the server using specially crafted commands in the HTTP request. And this was hidden behind a tree of other dependencies. And then The direct dependency eventually ended up being used in this mail parser package, which has a huge amount of downloads every month. So it's pretty easy to see how in large developer communities, these kinds of indirect dependencies can be used to hide exploitable code. So the vulnerabilities in third-party dependencies that we're using in our applications are super important because they make up such a big part of our code bases these days. But as we said earlier, the lines between our application and the container it runs in are pretty blurred. The container is the delivery mechanism for the application. It's probably the application is never deployed anywhere without the container. The container images are typically developed at the same time, maybe by the same team. So for all intents and purposes, we can actually consider them the same thing. And like the availability of library code, of packages, modules in programming languages, the huge growth in container registries has been great for the ability to run pre-packaged software really easily, and for us to consume that stuff in our own infrastructure. But they're also a big source of vulnerabilities. When we look at the container landscape, there's still the best practices are emerging around things like building minimal containers. But there's still a huge amount of people using containers directly from upstream registries. And lots of these can have very significant amounts of vulnerability in them. So we're presented with lots of possibilities for attack vectors. And as developers, when we use container images, we need to understand that. And then there's also a fairly long tail of folks taking the path of least resistance by giving applications containers based on full operating systems with package managers and all that kind of stuff. And when we look at operating systems in general, the amount of vulnerabilities in base operating systems is massively growing. Partly because operating systems by design ship with a lot of software in them. And in some ways, operating systems can be seen to sort of break the paradigm of containers. We want these really small things, really minimal, immutable, but there's still a lot of people using these kinds of images for container deployments. And this is from some statistics from a survey we did a couple of years ago now. But what this is showing here is that a lot of people don't think about emerging vulnerabilities once their workloads are in production. So an image that you used when you deployed that workload, it may now have vulnerabilities in it which weren't there when it was built. So if you're not looking at containers you've already got in production, then you're never going to find out if they are now vulnerable. And fixing, especially container image vulnerabilities, usually isn't very hard. Over 40% of Docker image vulnerabilities can usually be fixed by upgrading the base image. And around 20% can be fixed just by rebuilding them. A lot of containers will do some kind of upgrade during the build process based on the instructions in the Docker file. So container images, our third-party dependencies, and the next thing we really need to consider is our infrastructure as code. And as we've moved kind of wholesale into cloud and now into Kubernetes, configuration is almost entirely in code and it's part of our development workflow. And by configuration, we can include all of our Kubernetes YAML files, things like Helm charts, any automation that we're using, things like Terraform, and all the policies and configuration that goes alongside that. And this is a hugely growing field, as we can see from the amounts of this kind of code that's in GitHub, in public repos in GitHub now. And I think we're really only just starting to view that as something we need to consider from a security perspective. Kubernetes is increasingly complex. And as we've moved the responsibility for developing that kind of code into our development teams, there's clearly space for misunderstandings about how things work. And this is also then compounded with things like service meshes that increases the complexity even further. And with this much code out there in kind of public repositories, you can probably see the potential risks of taking that path of least resistance. Perhaps we're going to reuse some code we found as a template, and we might not fully understand how that thing actually works. And these are all very important in terms of the security of our environments. And this quote from OWASP is a little bit old now, but it still proves the point that a huge amount of security breaches are coming from misconfigurations in infrastructure as we've moved wholesale into cloud and Kubernetes. And if we look at most of the big breaches over the last couple of years, are almost always a combination of application level vulnerability that allows an attacker to get a foothold, and then infrastructure misconfiguration that allows that attacker to expand the blast radius of the attack. And these kinds of configuration issues, I'm sure we've all seen examples of them: cloud credential leakages in our Git repositories, Kubernetes clusters getting infected with crypto miners. These are all down to misconfiguration issues. So when we look at continuous delivery and continuous integration, where do we start with looking at where we start to address some of these issues? So overall, the kind of emerging answer to how we should be looking at security now is that we need to shift our security practices all the way to the left and embed security into our development pipeline so that our developers take on that burden of security responsibility all the way through their work. And this is where this idea of DevSecOps that you may have heard used comes into play. So we take those ideas about DevOps, where we bring those two teams together, but we also include security in that. So we integrate security considerations into our workflows in exactly the same way that we merged development and operations over the last few years. And where do we start in practice? Well, the obvious first place is at the developer. We need developers to have insights immediately into potential security issues that are tightly integrated into their workflows. So that means tools that are available from our local command lines and tools that integrate into our development environments, into our IDEs. And the idea being here is that we reduce the overhead for developers to use those tools right at the point where they're working before code even gets anywhere near our repositories. And kind of most importantly, the tooling that we use has to provide developers with the right information to be able to make security decisions. Developers aren't security experts, and so lists of vulnerabilities are actually not that useful, because what we're really looking for here is what should I fix and how do I fix it? So we need to look for tools that give us insights into how severe vulnerabilities are and how exploitable they are, but also that give us remediation advice. So how to actually go about fixing them and which ones we should prioritize. And as we saw earlier, we want tools that will deal with third-party dependencies, what's going on in our container images, and all of that infrastructure code. And you can do all of this with Snyk for free. Other security tools are also available. It's a very rich ecosystem in the cloud-native space. So our second touch point is clearly Git itself. Git, most people I think are using Git these days. Our Git repositories are now the single source of truth for everything. So that has to be secure. And Git itself has been pretty secure over the years. And in most cases, folks are actually using hosted Git services like GitHub, GitLab, which have been pretty good at security. But there are definitely process-related things to consider around our source code management systems. By its nature, Git can open you up to certain issues, and our users need to be aware of these things. So we want to be doing things like enforcing two-factor authentication, making sure our users have strong key security practices and that they're keeping their local Git updated regularly. Exposing private data is a massive risk in Git repositories, particularly in commit histories. So this happens very often, that people will accidentally leave their cloud credentials check in, check out, they've forgotten it's actually in the history for all time. And so when we this also can be a problem when we import a repository. Perhaps we've been using it locally and we push it into our upstream SCM. And again, we can expose things that are there in the history. They might not be obvious at first glance that they're there. Configuration data should really never be in Git and encrypted, even in local repositories, for exactly those reasons. So we need to make sure we educate our users to use things like git ignore for things like credentials and stuff that may be in there. It goes without saying that we need strong review processes. This is really all about the human aspect and making sure that our processes are correct and being followed. And we want to enforce what we can here through automation. There's lots of things you can do with things like pre-commit hooks to make sure that that things are being followed and that problems aren't being injected really early on. Now, once we're confident that our source code management is secure, we can start to leverage automation here for security. On every pull request, we can look for the same issues that we were catching at that local development stage, but this time it's going to be automated on an ongoing basis. The key difference at this stage, though, is that because those checks are automated, we're also monitoring for things that might have changed upstream since a particular piece of code was committed, even if our code itself hasn't changed. So, the upstream dependency may have new vulnerabilities, and new things have been discovered all the time. So those monitoring scans that we're doing over time in our repositories will allow us to pick things up right here where it's relatively easy to fix. And our container registries also fall into this category. Nothing's fixed in stone, so an image that looked fine when it was built could now be vulnerable. So if your registry has built-in scanning, most of them do these days, take advantage of it or use tools that will integrate with the registries that you're using. If you're using Docker Hub has Snyk scanning built into it, but there are lots of other scanners that integrate with lots of other registries. And one of the important thing about the registry is this bit about images that haven't been rebuilt for a long time. Over time, you're always going to get degradation in terms of vulnerabilities creeping into older things. And so if you've got images that haven't been rebuilt for a long time, then they're going to have changed from the point when you created them. Another integration point is our continuous integration systems, our build systems. And again, here we can build in automated security scanning on those containers, on our configuration, on our code. And at this point, we're also looking for things that that might not have changed, but because we're doing this when we rebuild, we can catch those things again upstream that might have changed since that piece of code entered the source code repository. And then the final place we want to be looking is our production environments. Containers in production, particularly if they don't change very often, can end up with vulnerable images. So we need to be looking both at running containers and as a double check at new containers being spawned. And in production, we can also take advantage of things like admission controllers, stuff like Open Policy Agent, which these things, it will give you basically a gate that enforces a particular security configuration, and it won't let you launch pods unless they have the correct security configuration. So the takeaways from all of this is that we need to move, shift security left. We need to empower our developers to make decisions about security based on modern tooling, modern process. Security teams can no longer really be gatekeepers with control over deployment. And we need to consider the role of security professionals to be advisors and toolsmiths as opposed to gatekeepers. So empowering our development teams to continue developing software, delivering features, and delivering stuff to our businesses. And visibility and remediation of security issues need to be baked into each stage of our development pipeline. So leveraging automated tools to scan our third-party code, our container images, and our infrastructure code. So that's all from me. So thank you very much for listening. I am happy to take any questions that folks might have.
Yeah, I see many questions from the chat.
Oh yeah, we've got quite a few in the chat. So shall we start with the first one? Is there a site which would benchmark which tool is better? We have Falco and Aquasec as well. So I'm always quite wary of getting into this thing about which tool is better, right? I mean, ultimately, tools do different things. Falco, for example, is looking at runtime behavior. And so, you know, that's super useful. It's an emerging field, very much anomalous behavior detection, but tools like Falco are really great for doing that. And so, you know, I think you've got to think about what works best for you. There's never going to be one single magic bullet that solves all the problems around security, right? It's going to depend on what your environment is, what tools your developers feel happiest using, and what things are most effective in terms of your environment. So I think you've got to try things, and you've got to work with your developers to understand what things give them the best value in terms of being able to fix stuff. Would Snyk detect my passwords or passphrases used in code and detect that as a vulnerability? So I guess this is really talking about secrets detection, and secrets detection is actually a pretty tricky field in general, because it's very hard for code to understand what's actually a secret and what's not. Definitely in the infrastructure infrastructure as code scanning that Snyk does, we will detect certain named variables in things like Terraform. If it looks like that might be a credential, then it's going to flag that. There are other tools that say they do secrets detection. I think your mileage may vary with all of those kinds of things, because again, it's a very hard problem for a computer to solve, right? I mean, what is a secret? I've got a variable that's called something. It's one of those things that requires a human a lot of the time to work out what that is. It's certainly something that we're working on. I know the development team is spending a lot of time thinking about this problem at the minute. So this is an interesting question. Before we decide to secure anything, should we be doing risk analysis to find out if we need to spend resources securing it? So security is always a trade-off, right, between risk versus effort to fix. And so, you know, and again, that's a very difficult question for anybody who isn't familiar with your own environment to be able to answer what's the risk versus effort. Certainly when you use Snyk, the prioritization scores on a particular vulnerability have an element that is based on, that is aimed at helping you answer this, in the sense that the score is not just based on the severity of the vulnerability. It's also based on things like, is there a mature exploit for it? And most importantly, is there a fix available? Because as soon as you have a fix available, then the effort that's required in order to fix that vulnerability is significantly lower, right? So it's kind of a no-brainer. There's a fix, it's a high severity vulnerability, just fix it. Whereas, you know, so I think what we're all working towards in the security space is trying to make that process easier, especially as the responsibility for security moves into developers, because, you know, as a developer, you're never going to sit there and read all of these CVEs and say, oh, this is, you know, am I vulnerable to this? You know, I mean, I've got container images that got 900 vulnerabilities in them. Well, I mean, I can never understand what those 900 vulnerabilities even are, right? So the tooling is getting better at giving you signals about how to manage that risk versus effort. But I mean, in general, I think I guess there's very few things that should not be secured, right? Because you care about most things, otherwise, why have you made it? You know, if you've got something that you don't care about, I mean, perhaps you've got something that exists on a laptop that isn't connected to a network, right? Well, then there's very little point in fixing vulnerabilities in that because they're not going to be very exploitable. But so yeah, it's a big question. I'm not sure I answered it, but I think some things to think about there. What's next? Does Snyk provide a demo license? So Snyk is actually has an entirely free tier. So everything that we talked about today, you can do for free in Snyk. Just sign up for a free account, and that'll continue forever. That's part of what Snyk is. If you do have a license, you get other things. You get things like enterprise reporting. You get some of the integrations that are more kind of enterprise focused are part of the paid tiers. And also, if you need to do a lot of scanning, you know, then you need to look at those paid tiers. But there's a whole range of things there. But if you want to try Snyk out or use it on your projects, you know, if they're not huge projects, then, you know, by all means, the free version will be useful to you forever. So, yep. Is there any tool to scan containers at runtime? So are we assuming by runtime, what are we talking about here? Like in a Kubernetes cluster when they're running in Docker? Yes, all scanners will do that. So yeah. Can I run Snyk on my own server? Yes, you can. In an enterprise with license, that's one of the biggest things about the enterprise tiers. Lots of enterprises want to run it on-prem because they don't want their scan information to be flowing outside their network. So yes, you can do that. And would any information be passed to any cloud or insights to sync? No, I believe the on-prem is entirely on-prem. Everything's just between the Snyk instance that's deployed on your prem. Is Snyk supported in self-hosted container registries? Yes, depending on any of the supported registries, wherever you're running them, you can point Snyk to them. Would Snyk detect containers that are running as root? Snyk will currently detect the root settings in your configuration YAML files. We are not currently scanning the running configuration inside Kubernetes, although that will be coming soon. Is the PowerPoint publicly available? I can share that with the folks running the meetup, and I'm sure they can share it with whoever is interested. So hopefully I got to all of your questions there. Thank you. That's great to have lots of different questions, and that's always the best part of the talk, really. So thank you for your contributions. If anyone's got any further questions.
Yeah, folks, if you want to speak, just use the raise hand button and I'll unmute you if you want to directly interact with the speaker.
Hi there, Matt. Absolutely brilliant presentation, and thank you for the Kubernetes Bangalore. I'm really impressed with your presentation. It was really amazing. We're just wondering if this is available, and is this something which we can bring it to our clients or wherever we're working? Because I see a lot of value in Snyk, especially given the fact I do the consulting type of role, and there are a lot of organizations which are really oblivious to security.
So if that was a kind of, I'm thinking that you're asking me a sort of business development question there about partnering. Is that, was I understanding that right?
Yes, maybe, or giving some of you guys like, look, this is something which I'm happy to get you forwarded. or maybe just having the presentation, and or just on a very simplistic scale, bringing that security awareness within the organization and making them aware that there's a tool like this which is available in the market. Happy for them to explore, you know.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, I can certainly introduce you to. We actually have a team in India now, including one of my teams. So we have a developer advocate who's in India. So I can introduce you to her, and she can have that conversation with you.
Absolutely, would love to.
So if you want to send me your email address, or
Sure. And can I just is there any way I can directly send my email through to you?
I think you should be able to direct message me, right?
Okay, yeah, perfect. Thank you. I'll definitely do that.
In the chat here.
Thanks. Yep. Please let me know if you've got my email there.
Yeah, I got it. That's great. Okay.
I'm actually here in Australia, so I'm not sure if you have any contact. I attended this.
You're in Australia. Oh, well, I also have another member of my team who's based in Australia, so I can introduce you to him.
That would be appreciated.
Whereabouts in Australia are you?
I'm in Melbourne, Matt. Melbourne.
In Melbourne, right? Okay. Yeah, I'll introduce you to Steve Kuchin, who's in my team, and he is all around that region. So
fantastic. That's great. Thank you.
Any more questions? All right then. I guess we'll take a 5 minutes break. Oh, okay. I see something. Okay, just a comment. Okay. All right. So we'll take a 5 minutes break, and then we have Pushkar here for our next talk. We'll start after that. So
thank you very much, folks.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah.
Speak to you soon.
Hey Suraj, maybe while we are on break, I can start sharing my screen and test audio and screen sharing.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you hear me fine?
Yep, absolutely fine.
Okay, great. All right. You can see it?
Yes, I can see the browser window.
And
yes.
Let me try now. How about now?
I can see it in the presenter mode. Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. I'll keep it like this then. And then we'll just continue when we want to start.
Yep, we'll start in another 3 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
I guess we are about time. So, sure, Pushkar, take over and start right away. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the first presentation and are still excited for this one. I'm going to talk about a topic that's kind of close to my heart because I have worked as an engineer before. I've worked in the security team, and often, for no fault of either of the parties, we end up not being friends. And today, what I wanted to see is how can we change that? And is there something that we can do, not as like a bug fix or something, but cultural change where we help each other and then become friends. But before that, I wanted to see if I can talk a bit about myself. Okay, I guess the photo is not showing up, but you can see me, so that's fine, I think. So I'm Pushkar Joglekar, my preferred pronouns are he, him. I have lived in different cities, starting in Nashik, then Pune, and then I'm currently in San Francisco Bay Area. I speak in three different languages and understand them: Marathi, Hindi, and English. Why I wanted to share that is, as a non-native English speaker, it took me a while to go close to native fluency. So what I wanted to offer today is for anyone who is hesitant to ask questions just because they are not sure about their English, feel free to ask your questions in Marathi, Hindi, English. Mala chalel, mujhe chalega. And what I'll do is I'll translate it for others so that nobody misses out, and then I'll answer in English. Additionally, if you feel like sharing questions on chat is another option, I'm fine with that as well. What I may not be able to go through is the chat while I'm presenting, so we'll cover through all the questions at the end if they are on the chat. All right. And I work for in my day job as a senior security engineer at VMware Tanzu. Previously worked at Visa, who is a massive end user for Kubernetes, where I was securing large scale container deployments. Wrote a book with Nigel Polton, which is titled literally the Kubernetes book. Both the security chapters is something I was able to contribute. Spoke at KubeCon a couple of years ago, and hopefully very soon. I'm a member of Kubernetes 6 security and CNCF tax security. I contribute in code and non-code contributions in GitHub or docs or white papers. You can find more info about me on my GitHub website, and I'm generally more active on Twitter compared to LinkedIn. So if you want to really reach me out, either way is fine. But if you're on Twitter, go for that. So let's jump into the topic. As we've discussed, like we generally interact with these three teams or these three parties. The first side is the developers who want to ship awesome new features, explore cool technology like Kubernetes, and basically try to solve people's problem and make some dent in the universe. Customers want to satisfy their customers, and what is important for them is the app shouldn't go down, and if it goes down it should be easy to fix, just like our iPhone or Android phones. If you restart them, whatever has happened is fixed. And another thing that they want to make sure is they don't want to get hacked, and while doing all of that they want to make sure they don't spend too much money and are fiscally responsible. On the other side, there is a security team who, even though it may seem like it, doesn't want to stop people from shipping, doesn't want to hamper developer productivity, and wants things to be secure by default. And while doing all of that, they want to make sure that whatever money is being spent is actually reducing the risk versus no risk reduction, but a lot of money spent, or a lot of risk reduction and few less money spent. So all of them have their own priorities. They are all right in their own way. Also, these are probably things that I've shared may not be actually always true for everyone. So there would be a developer who may not fall into this. Same thing for customers and security. But just for the purposes of discussion, I wanted to sort of center around these kind of personas for everyone. The next thing I wanted to chat about is also myths about Kubernetes and containers. I'll just quickly check the chat. All right, okay, so looks good. I was just making sure my audio is working. All right, so myths about Kubernetes and containers. So one thing we've always heard is, hey, Kubernetes is used by everyone, so it must be secure by default. Well, it's not actually true. There are many things that can be improved from security perspective. Things like network policies are open by default. Not all Kubernetes clusters when deployed are CIS compliant 100%. Vulnerable images are allowed just as easily as non-vulnerable images. Some might think this is not a Kubernetes issue, and I probably agree. There is no encryption of secrets by default. No SecCom capabilities, AppArmor, SLX enabled by default. Root containers are allowed, again, just as easily as non-root containers. Privileged container is allowed. Host path mounts are allowed. There is one caveat to the last four though, with the new replacement for pod security admission controller coming in. There is a chance that this might get easier to enable by default. And then there have been some PRs that have opened that are trying to make SecCom enabled by default, AppArmor enabled by default. So things are moving in the right direction. And as a member of Snyk Security in Kubernetes, I'm happy to help out in whatever way I can there. The other thing is we always assume Kubernetes cluster is multi-tenant. So I can run different workloads in the same cluster and they will be protected from each other. This is also, again, not true based on your trust model and trust boundaries in threat model. So for example, RBAC will isolate the users so that a user in a team doesn't get access to the pods in another team, but it doesn't do workload isolation. So if there are two untrusted tenants, they can run their pods in the same node with a shared kernel. So if you have a container escape, then you are sharing a kernel with tenants that you don't want to trust. And similar to unlike VMs, containers don't have hypervisor isolation. So you by default are isolated with Linux namespaces. And there are some runtimes coming up which allow hypervisor isolations. But by default, most of the common ones have Linux namespace level isolations and C groups to maintain the resource consumption to a manageable way. So this is a lot to cover, right? In maybe 35, 45 minutes. So what we'll try to do is just focus on one thing, running Kubernetes pods securely. And hopefully many of you are involved in Kubernetes in your day job as well, or in your college projects. And what will really help here is if we can do as engineers something that will help security team focus on the harder things. So that's what we're going to focus today. The first really important thing that can be done and is relatively easy to detect is my container image running as a non-root user? So there are different places where you can define a user. A Docker file as in a user directive, security context of a pod or a deployment or a daemon set, pod security policies, and whatever the replacement as an admission controller is going to be. Also, taking a step back, what is root user? Root user in very simple terms is a user with UID 0. And I'm sure some of you are saying like, hey, this is like basic stuff. I know this, but I want to make sure if there is one person who doesn't know this, they are aware now. So anytime you want to run a container as a non-root user, you basically have to ensure that it runs with a UID that is non-zero. Now, while this is clear to understand, it's harder to know whether you're actually running container as a non-root user and with as a corollary the pod as well. So let's think about this in a agile fashion, or if you're writing a story in Jira, how would it look like? So this is what I came up with. As a developer, when I'm building apps as a container, I want to know if my app runs as a non-root user in a standalone container and as a pod. So if I do a Docker run, does it run by default as a non-root user? If I do kubectl create pod, does it run as a non-root user? So let's find out. So the first one is trying to figure out what my user is set as in a container image when I'm going to invoke it to run as a container. So this is a simple command, Docker run interactive, and then entry point is basically saying that run this command when you're starting the container, and the nginx is a container name. It can be any name you want. So when you run this, what will happen is if your user defined is root user, it will output root. If it is something else, it will output something like web user or anything, whatever the username that you have defined it as. There are some caveats here where a username is not necessarily equivalent to the ID being 0. So you can use other commands like id-u, which will give you the actual UID of the user. The other part is trying to figure out what's going on in a Docker file. So if you run this command, you will see if a user directive is defined or not. The simple way is there may be a chance that multiple user directives are there in one Docker file. So in that case, the one at the bottom, not at the top, is the one that gets applied during runtime. So look at the last user, because sometimes for installing stuff, you may want to become root and then you can lower your privileges to non-root at the bottom. So look at that. If it's non-root, then you're good. The other one in terms of pod or a deployment or a daemon set is grabbing the field run as user. Same thing, if you have a YAML file and you grab it with this, you will know what UID you are defining. Based on that, you can decide, okay, this seems fine. And if it's running, if it is not defined, then it will basically use what is defined in your container image. So keep that in mind. Now, the second part that is always a big question and involves a lot of back and forth between security team and engineering team is this question: is my container image vulnerable? And it seems a harder question to answer, but if you do some work for even for like half an hour, you can make a lot of progress. So let's look at this also as a story. As a developer, when I'm building apps as a container, I want to know if my image has vulnerabilities, which of these vulnerabilities can I fix? Validate if I actually fix the vulnerabilities. So let's look at this one by one. To know whether my image is vulnerable, you need a vulnerability scanner. So we'll use, for discussion purposes, Trivi here, but really any scanner, even the one that you heard from Matt before this, could work well. And this is just used as an example. So the best way to start up with Trivi is going to this link and installing it on your Mac or a Linux machine or anywhere you want to do your development work. Once you install it, you can run, oh, I guess I skipped a slide. Okay, so you can run on this command, which is basically Trivi command, subcommand image, and then image name and image tag. What this does is it will go run the scan, connect to a server, and then collect the database of vulnerabilities and database of vendor updates. And then it will do an image tag, and then it will run a scan on the entire image on all the layers. Based on that, it will generate an output that says how many vulnerabilities are there, what is the severity, what is the summary, what is the description, is there a fix available. So sometimes this can be like 100 plus vulnerabilities, sometimes it's like in a handful of them. The part to consider here is, as a developer, you don't really you can't really, or nobody can expect you to understand what the vulnerabilities are. What you can do for sure though is, if you know there is a fix, you can fix it. So we'll focus on that using this flag, which is the ignore unfixed. And what this does is, it will run the same scan, but it will apply a filter where it will say, okay, let me see which vulnerabilities here are actually something that have a fix available. And often these are very few in number compared to the first result you get. So as a result of that, once you get this, you know exactly what you can fix. And once you know what you can fix, then comes the next part about how do I fix it? Another thing is, sometimes this huge command can become hard to remember. So one suggestion I would make, and this is completely optional, is create an alias for this default, because this is what you really care about. Maybe for security, didn't they care about all the vulnerabilities? But for you, you can create this alias and then run this 4-letter command with your image and tag, and then you will always get the vulnerabilities that you can fix. The next thing when it comes to fixing vulnerabilities is surprisingly related to image layer caching. So let me do a quick time check. Okay, I think we're fine. So in case of image layer caching, what happens is, there are multiple images, as you might have when you interact with Docker or any other runtime. There are multiple images in your laptop, and sometimes many images share their layers. There are some advantages to this. So if you have a layer that's already pulled locally, you don't have to install it again and again. As a result of that, if you don't have to pull it, your Docker builds are faster instead of pulling each layer every single time. So as a result, the default is, if the layer doesn't exist, Docker will pull it. If the layer exists, Docker will reuse it. This has some surprising implications related to security, which we'll talk about. Just want to do a quick chat check. Everything is fine. Yes, all right, okay. I'll go through all the questions, I promise, after the session. So let's continue here. Now, there are two places where image caching and security kind of intersect. The first one is base images. So let's take this example. Let's say my first line in my Docker file is from Debian. Now, what this will do is, if you are building your image using this base image for the first time, and you haven't pulled this base image before ever again, you will make Docker actually pull the base image into your laptop, and then it will stay there. And because you haven't shared the image tag or defined the image tag, it will try to pull the latest tag. The interesting thing about this is, in Docker Hub or other registries, there is a chance that your tags can be mutable. What does that mean? So by mutable tags, you are allowed to push as a creator of a base image. So if I'm a Debian upstream maintainer and I want to push a new latest for Debian, I can actually replace my older latest tag image into a new one, and the old one actually doesn't point to latest anymore. So as a result of that, a latest today versus latest in August might be different depending on whether a push was made by an upstream maintainer or not. And many times what also happens is, when the images are updated or replaced, they come with many security fixes for packages that are part of the image. So as a result of that, if you go by the default pull model of Docker and you pull the latest today, and you think, oh, in August, if I do a build again, I will always get the latest. That doesn't work out always as you would expect. So any vulnerability that gets fixed between today and August, you will not get a fix if you use the default Docker pull model. And then there is another part to this. So you might be familiar with these commands: apty update, apty upgrade. And basically what they are trying to do is the first command will try to get all the information that is available for what updates do I have available that I can install. So that's what the first command will do. The second command will actually install those based on the information from the first command. And then what happens is, after this command is executed, a new image layer is created. Once that new image layer is created, next time when Docker build sees this command, it will not run it again because it thinks, oh, the Docker file has not changed. So I'm not going to do anything like this. And it will just reuse the layer from the old build. And as a result of that, if there is new update, in especially security one, you won't get it because this command is skipped because of caching. So that's why caching has some weird intersections with security updates. Thankfully, this is not very difficult to resolve. So let's talk about that. Okay, I think I'm missing a slide. Yeah, okay, all right. So like I said here, the no cache flag will allow you to always run this apty update and apty upgrade. And what this will do is, anytime, regardless of whether this command was executed before, it will always execute this line in your Docker file, regardless of caching status. So as a result of that, if you get an update between now and August, you'll get it if you use this cache along with Docker build. And then there is another command for pull for base image. Let me see if I have this. Yeah, okay, all right. Sorry about that. So in case of the base image, there is a different flag called --pull. What that does is, regardless of whether you have a base image with the same tag locally, it will make sure that if there exists a base image or any from directive applied image with the same tag in the remote registry, like Docker Hub or anything else, it will check if that hash of that image and the one I have locally matches. If it thinks and knows it doesn't match, it will pull the one from remote, and then based on that, it will start building using that latest image. So if we use basically these two flags, we will always get the base image regardless of whether we have pulled it before during previous Docker builds, and we will always get the latest security updates regardless of whether this command was executed or not. Another catch to this is, if your image cache inside your laptop or the storage where you're storing the images is wiped, there is basically no cache. And in that case, even if you use these flags, it will have no effect because basically you don't have anything cached. So it will always pull and it will always execute. But it's how often have you really cleaned up your images in your workstation? So instead of doing that, this might be an easier fix. There are some more caveats to this. So there is a chance that you may want to use pinned images sometimes, and pinned images with immutable tags. Why does this matter? So let's take an example. Let's say my Docker file has from Debian 10.9 instead of from Debian, which will then default to latest. What this will do is, if the upstream maintainer has defined that anything which is not a latest tag will be a immutable tag, They will not replace an old 10.9 image with a new 10.9 image. So as a result of that, you will get reproducible builds if you have a tag that's immutable and you've pinned to that tag. When do you need reproducible builds? Especially when you're shipping a product, not when you are working on a feature, right? So similarly, just like we apply all other dev practices to our coding and working with IDEs, we can apply it here also. So for release branches, you can have your Docker file to pinned to an immutable tag. For feature branches, keep using latest with the mutable tag. So whenever you build and you use pull command, it will always pick the latest image and you will always get the latest security updates. Same thing for no cache. So if you are on a release branch, maybe you want to skip it. And the reason is same. So it enables consistent layering for each release build. So if you have some image where you have done apt-y update and now you are in a code-free state or in RC1, RC2 state of your release, then if you skip no cache, it will not install any new updates, which may be fine because you want to have reproducible builds and not cause some weird issues where a new update caused something to break that you did not expect to break when you were close to GA. There is a chance where you might want to actually use no cache even if you are near a release, is when there is a critical fix available for a vulnerability. And that's where you can talk to your security team and say, hey, I saw this when I ran my scan. This seems really serious. Is it? And if yes, should I fix it before we go GA? So that will really help. And again, to our point earlier, security team will be thankful that you asked this. And then for feature branches, like we discussed, similar to -- pull, you can use no cache so that you keep getting updates and you can keep running on the latest installations of packages and versions. Next one is, now you learned all of these three things, right? But the bigger question is, how do I apply this next week? Well, let's say you start on Monday again and you want to know, okay, I learned this, but what do I do? And how does it make sense for me to apply this? So what you can do in this case is, first, check if the image of your app runs as a root user. If you think your image of your app runs as a root user, you know how to find it. And once you find it, you can switch the UID to non-zero. And many times that is the only thing you need to do. There are some times when, especially when you're working with Java-based images, that you have to manage some file permissions and do some change mode or change owners. And then once you do that as part of your Docker file or a multi-stage build, then you're able to run as a non-root user. Next thing is, how do I check if my image is vulnerable? So you know that now. So if you're responsible for an image or your team is responsible for an image, run those scans with Rivi or any other scanner you like. Check if there are fixes available for your vulnerabilities. And if there are, try to fix them using no layer caching. And many times, most of the vulnerabilities, if you're using a base image like Debian, will be actually part of your base image, and your application layers don't actually often have a lot of vulnerabilities. So in this case, if you do a -- pull or -- no cache, what will happen is you will get the latest image. It will have the security fixes. And when you are done with building that image and you run your scan, you will find out that, oh, my vulnerabilities have gone down now. So do this, fix it, make your containers, if they are not already, run as non-root users. Find out if your images are vulnerable. Find out how you can fix them. Are you using layer caching the way it should? Share it with your security team. They love to hear that, hey, one engineer actually did some security work. They really enjoy it. And it's sort of like discussion points over the virtual water cooler, or discussion points over a coffee when they are talking with other security folks that, hey, you know, this person, he or she or they actually fixed something that, and we didn't have to even tell them. And then hopefully, like I'm saying, their reaction is similar in your security team, where they are really, really excited that somebody did something without asking. And then once you hear back from them, don't forget to tweet me or let me know on whatever social media platform you want, and tell me how they reacted. Okay. All right. With that, thank you. And I'll start going through the questions on the chat. But if you want to speak up and share questions also, that's fine. We can go face-to-face questions first. I think we have time.
Yeah, if you wish to speak, just use the raise hand feature. I'll unmute you.
All right. Okay. So I see one question from Amir, but if there is a hand up, please stop me, Suraj, and we can go to that person.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So Amir is asking how to join Kubernetes 6 security. So good question. I think just like Suraj and Nabarun said earlier, that first join the Kubernetes Slack channel and then find out SIG security channel. I'm leading another subgroup sub project inside SIG security called SIG security tooling, and we have a pinned post there which actually explains what do you do to join. There is no, at this time at least, any kind of attendance or requirements or prerequisites you need to follow to join. Just start attending the meetings, subscribe to our Google group, and then keep interacting with the people in the channel, ask questions. That's pretty much what you need to do, and that's what I actually did. So Nabarun has shared a very useful link. This will have much more information than what I can share now. Go through that, understand what the charter is of that group, understand what they are trying to do, what docs they have already submitted, are there any issues and PRs that are open. And then, yes, so Tamil, thank you. That's the right channel. So for Nabarun is also sharing more information. So join the mailing list, join the Slack channel, attend meetings. Yeah, I completely agree. And for folks in India, sometimes meetings are in very, very unfriendly time slots. So it's okay if you don't want to join or can't join all the meetings. And there are recordings available. We record all our meetings, so you can watch them. Each recording link for SIG security is added in the agenda or the meeting minutes, so you can always take a look there. Now, I think Suraj has also shared some
There
good
is one.
examples. Sorry, go
There's
ahead.
one question though. So
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll ask the person to. Okay. I think you can ask Tamil one.
Hi, Pushkar. I think thanks for the great session. So, is there any one-on-one kind of document so that people can get to know what are the basic uh, security things which they need to take care when they get started with Kubernetes or things like that? Is there any document? If you can share, it will be great.
Yes, I think that's good point. I may not be able to Google right now and share, but what I can do is I can point you to some resources verbally, and if you don't find them or are struggling, either send a message on SIG Security Slack, and you'll see many people have asked a similar question there, so their answers would also help. So send a message on Six Security Slack to me if you don't find the things I'll share now, or connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and then I'll share you the actual links. But few resources I would suggest is the official docs for Kubernetes security. There is a page in the official docs which talks a bit about overall security of Kubernetes, and most importantly, there are multiple links from that page going to other things which are related to security. So that will be good one. Other things I would say is there is a awesome Kubernetes security repo, which is covering many other links about things that you can do from security perspective. So that is another good link. And then obviously I'm biased here, but if you have bought Nigel Poulton's book, there are a couple of security chapters from me there, which goes through a lot of details. So take a look at that and let me know if you find that useful.
Sure. Thanks, Pushkar. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Don't forget to ping me if you don't find it, or even if you find it useful, just let me know. Hey, this was useful.
Yeah, definitely. I'll keep you posted.
All right. Cool. Any other hand up?
Yeah, there is one more.
Okay, go for it.
Can you try to unmute Mulidhar? I'm trying to ask to unmute thing. It doesn't seem to work. Okay, it worked.
Yeah, thanks, Suraj. Hi, Pushkar. Thanks for the wonderful session. Just one basic doubt, as last doubt as regarding some books and things. After searching more and more how to start with the Kubernetes and how to cope up easily, what I finally got to know is Kubernetes in action. Should I go with the book, or is there any other resources? It is by Luca Musa from Cloud Native Computing.
Right. Okay. So let's see. I think there are several resources, and this is more like a philosophical answer from me. So take it with like I am thinking from my perspective. It really depends on what medium you like to learn from. So some people like YouTube videos, some people like to learn from organized course like in Coursera or Linux Foundation courses. Some people like to read books, some people like to just read stuff and Google things. Based on whatever you like, pick that. I don't think there is any dearth of information on any of these mediums about Kubernetes security. But again, one of the main things and goals for Six Security in our charter is to help educate about security to everyone. So if you have any questions or don't know where to start, join that group and let us know that, hey, I'm struggling with this, can you help? And then we'll go through that particular case and your specific questions, and then hopefully we can help out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks, Pushkar.
All right, cool. Now, what are the ways a security team can help dev to tighten the security on deployed application and not hamper dev productivity? Yeah. Okay. So I would say
a bit.
Sorry.
So this was my question, right? Like the
Yes.
handover thing. So yeah, like in general cases is like if the team comes with some idea, somebody does a POC, it's approved, and then everyone speeds towards deploying it right away.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, there is there is no consideration to security whatsoever. How does and what are the general practices or processes that the team should ideally follow before actually going into production without hampering the overall iteration cycle of a developer that they do?
Yeah, I think this is good question. I'll try. How much time do we have? So I'll give a longer or a shorter answer based on that. 10 minutes more or more
I
than
think
10
we
minutes?
have time because almost both of the sessions ended before time. So
Okay. All right. So that's fine. Then good. I get to speak more. So this is really a risk-based question or a decision. If you, let's say the POC for the app is an application for finding the best cat image in the entire world, right? Then even if it gets hacked, the worst thing that can happen is you don't see cat images anymore. But if it's a sensitive application where maybe you are asking for Aadhaar card number, for example, right, which would be scary if it gets hacked. So those kind of things, based on what you are actually trying to get into production, makes or decides what you do before you go to production. I would say at the minimum, the 3 things I shared today, we should do it for anything that goes to production. And the reason being, these 3 things are very simple and fast to do. I think if you sat with a security engineer or you did it yourself, or anyone in the call for that matter, we could probably knock these 3 things out within a couple of hours, like before lunchtime on Monday, if we started in the morning. So from that perspective, if something is so quick and it is giving so much reward in terms of improved security, probably makes sense to try it out anyway. So that would be my take. Next one, let's see, unless there is a hand up, I'll keep going with the chat questions. So Docker image inspect / grep, also one more way to say whether container runs as root or not root. Yes, Nikhil, that's correct. I agree. One more thing I would add there is sometimes the container that's run will have a different user than the image user. And this can happen when you're doing, let's say, Docker run with a -u flag, which will allow you to set a user at runtime. And same thing if you are setting a user with the spec in security and security context field inside, there is a chance that the image user will not be the one that gets run, that runs the container. So this will help for the image user. For others, you might want to also try the other things that we discussed. Thank you for the link. I think clickable links always help. I'll share the slides as well later. Amir is asking, is Trivi part of Aqua Security? I believe so. Yeah. And great presentation. +1. What's the relation of non-zero ID for the user and groups? Girish. Okay, that's a good question. So there are non-zero and zero ID groups, as well as non-zero and zero user IDs. The difference is a user ID 0 has very high privileges for things to do on your local machine or an image or a Linux system that you're running Kubernetes on. However, the GID 0 by itself doesn't come with any special permissions where you can do whatever you want. That's not true. So you can be a non-root user in a GID 0, but if your UID 0, even if you're part of a non-zero group, you will still have special privileges. So that's the main part. If UID is 0, then you need to be careful and change if you can. If GID is 0, that's probably okay most of the times, unless there are some really high permissions that are very expansive, where anyone who is part of the group 0 gets access to a lot of things. So that's one caveat, at least I'm aware of, that you need to take care. Next question.
there is a
hand up. Okay, great. All right, more questions are better.
Yeah.
Suraj, are you mentioning about me?
Yep.
Okay.
Your hand is raised, yes.
Yeah, Pushkar, this was a great presentation and the session today. So I had a question. So let's say if someone amongst the participants wants to contribute back to Kubernetes security, tooling, docs, on anything, do you maybe want to give a brief rundown in maybe 3-4 minutes about the ongoing initiatives that Kubernetes security has taken, which are really good for beginners to get started with who are interested to get into security domains? That would be really helpful.
Yes, definitely. So I come from an end user background also, so I want to also share that perspective. There are some end users who are contributors to the project, and then there are some users who only use Kubernetes as an end user. For me, I learned much more about Kubernetes and security of Kubernetes when I started contributing to it. So from that perspective, if you are on similar boat, like you're an end user and don't know whether it's worth contributing or not, if your company is supporting or you have some extra time, definitely do it. And if you do it, these are some of the things you'll actually end up learning from Kubernetes 6 security. So we have 3 subgroups or sub projects like Nabaran mentioned: tooling, maybe we'll go alphabetically: audit, docs, and tooling. So audit is basically coming from a working group, which was a security audit for Kubernetes, maybe 2-3 years ago. Folks who have been longer in community can correct me. And they did audit on Kubernetes, a third-party audit, not by community members, but by actual vendors who did analysis based on threat model, pen testing, crypto analysis. And by crypto, I don't mean cryptocurrencies, the actual cryptography. So they did all of that analysis in 2019, and then they shared a report, white paper, and many other things, which was great. I learned a lot about it. But with things like Kubernetes, we change a lot, and there were multiple releases in the last couple of years, probably 10 plus, I would say. And as a result of that, we wanted to do an audit again. So that's where we are, and that subgroup or sub-project is doing that for this year. The dogs group is maybe the most uh, friendly in terms of if you're looking for non-code contributions or don't or have some issues with the docs in Kubernetes that you want to fix. So we look for anything that can be improved in terms of warnings, in terms of examples, in terms of clarification in the docs group that are related to security. And then that results in PRs in K website, Kubernetes website repo. And then we review it, we fix things if needed, and then that gets published so that people are aware. If something is important like kubeconfig files, then we have a warning there, for example, which was done very recently by Grace, I think. Third one, tooling, which is a sort of recent group which I'm leading in since last 3-4 months after I joined VMware. What we're trying to do is focus on improving the vulnerability management of Kubernetes as one of our main goals. So we did some work with some folks in India like Naveed and others on Snyk scanning. And what we are doing is doing a scan for build time dependencies of Kubernetes. And if we find a vulnerability in a build time dependency, then we are able to actually figure out if it impacts Kubernetes and fix it. I know Arsh has joined as well. Arsh also helped on that on that project too. So we're looking for more doing more work there on images and vulnerabilities of images, especially with the distroless. It will be interesting to do. So any help you can provide there is welcome. Lastly, what I would also say, the tooling group is sort of like a team of developers and engineers who want to help out on other SIG's priorities. So recently we did a pod security admission controller uh, contribution where we had a basic PR created with a structure from SIGAuth, and then we contributed, I think, 3 PRs from SIG security tooling, which will now land in 122. So anything other SIGs want to do, that security reader, we are like, hey, we want to help, and then we go and help each other. So that's in summary what we are trying to do. So join the group on channel or Google group and say hi. We don't bite. We are very friendly, welcoming, and we'll try to find something that is useful. Okay, I think Danny or Dani, sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name. Caching is the hardest problem in engineering. Yes, and naming as well. Hey Arsh, and Suraj is asking another question. To be sure of images in Kubernetes, it is suggested to use image with hash instead of a tag, since people do mutate tags. Yeah, I agree. I think that's another approach to do, especially when you're running live apps that consume live traffic, to use a hash so that you don't have to worry whether my tag is mutable or not, because Kubernetes really doesn't understand if my tag is mutable. It will just assume you're doing the right thing. So I definitely agree. The tags with hashes will be another good idea to do in your release branches. And for feature branches, keep going with the latest as much as you can. Okay, amazing. Hey, join tooling. Do you have meetings? I'm in AEST time zone. Yeah. So we have meetings generally in the morning time Pacific. So about a couple of hours from right now, not today, obviously. We have one security tooling meeting on Tuesday, one on Thursday. What I would recommend is, if you join the Google group, you will get invited in a day or so automatically to all those meetings. And then as a result of that, you can then decide if that meeting time works for you. And like I said, if it doesn't work, that's okay. We have recordings. I try to keep up with the recordings for a long time because I couldn't join that meeting because I had a recurring conflict. And then slowly, I was able to join. But either way is fine. You once you get the calendar invite, it will have meeting minutes, and in meeting minutes you'll have recordings. Okay, cool. Hussaina is saying need to drop off. Thanks, Matt and Pushkar. Great presentations. Thank you. Kumar is saying the same. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Suraj. That was the link I was talking about. And thank you, Navarun. That was the other link I was talking about. And yes, I think that one-on-one session, I haven't tried it, but I think that would be a good start for not just security, but even Kubernetes in general. I will give you a book for free, but there is catch. I don't understand that, but if you're still around, feel free to add more. Okay. The next is probably for Ashish. From Ashish is probably for Suraj. So I'll let him answer that. Will there be any session on ingress and certificate management or ingress? So next one is amazing. Ping me mega list of resources. Yes, that is another good link. Thank you, Nabarun. This also has link to Magno's awesome Kubernetes security and many other things you can do as a contributor. More on security context. Yes, that's another good link. Off topic. Okay, I can't answer that probably. Which is recommended? Oh no, maybe I can answer that. SCC setting we need to apply on OpenShift cluster with respect to security. Okay, so Hemant, you still around? Okay,
Yes.
looks like yes. All right. So I'll give my take. You should decide for yourself and your team, of course, what works for you. But again, this is similar to our risk discussion that Suraj and I were having earlier. Depending on what you are running, you can decide what SCC setting you want to apply. So there is always a balance between user experience and security. And if you have a very restrictive SCC, what may end up happening is you may have more pod failures, or you may have pods that will be in crash loop back off until you fix it. The opposite side of things is if you have a more general and generous SCC that you have applied by default, your pods will run, but they might be able to run with higher privileges, like maybe root user or maybe SE Linux disabled. So you look at the different 5 or 6 SCCs that come by default. I think the restricted one is the most restricted, as the name suggests. Then there is one which is a bit less restrictive, but overall okay. Maybe that is another one you can consider. And if you're running a cat website, then like I said, you can run whatever you want, as long as you don't mind missing out on cat pictures. So that's my take. But definitely do consider using SCC because it's probably one of the most important things as a cluster admin you can do for OpenShift clusters in terms of security.
Thank you. And another question, SCC we need to apply at cluster level or namespace level is recommended?
Right. So that is also again depending on what things you are running in your cluster. If you are running apps with the same trust across your entire cluster, maybe it makes sense to let them run with the same SCC across the cluster. If you're sharing apps but running in different namespaces, and different namespaces need higher privileges and some need lower, you can apply it namespace by namespace level.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I think some more good links about audit and Snyk scanning. Can you talk about alternative to PSP? I believe Suraj, you had a session on this last time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I can speak
Yes.
a bit more. But
Sure,
you can
sure.
also
Please. No, go ahead.
you can also add more because you probably know more by now. I'll try to explain in short. We have time. Okay, that's good. So basically, like every feature in Kubernetes, and Nabarun has been in release team for a while, so you can also add if I misspeak anywhere. There are different flags that are applied to features like alpha, beta, and then I think GA is the last one. So PSP is in those stages, and as we started to learn more about how it was used, we realized that there is actually chance to improve on it. So as a result of that, there was a proposal that was discussed last 6 to 9 months between SIGOT, SIG Security, and some others, where we tried to see what can we do better. Can something be even more secure by default? And as a result of that, there is an extensible pod security admission controller that will be applied in future Kubernetes releases. And depending on which security flag was added in which Kubernetes version, you can decide whether I want to let this be enabled by default, whether I want to just audit it, whether I just want to allow it. So those are some of the examples. And I see Suraj has added the YouTube link also for the session, so which I think will be really useful. Okay, PSP pod security policy. Yes. Oh, nice. Cats as a service. And then another question from Danny. Great talk, Pushkar. After these 3 actions to apply for images, where to look into? Also in terms of learning. I think firstly, after you apply these 3 actions or even one, please tell me how it worked out because I would love to hear from you. And after that, then one thing I would definitely recommend is start reading more about different things related to security. I think every KubeCon, there is at least a dedicated track for security policy identity. So go through the sessions from there, see what interests you, because there are so many other topics covered, and you can really keep watching one video every day, and it may not end until the next KubeCon. So go through those. If you like reading docs, go through the Kubernetes doc links in the Zoom chat. Go through the awesome Kubernetes security resources if you want. And then what else? You can read books. There are some good ones related to Kubernetes security, container security. Nigel's book that I helped him out, and he helped me more than I did actually, is also good, but I'm biased, so take it with a grain of salt. So yeah, so I think after these 3 actions, just read more and see what you like, because there are so many things to do, and whatever interests you, just do that, and you'll get better at it because you liked it in the first place. Okay, I think we are at the end of the chat.
I have one question before we.
Yes, go for it.
So there is this known issue in Kubernetes with respect to security that if a user doesn't have access to a secret, but
Right.
they can, if they can create pods or at least get pod logs or exec into a pod, they can trick Kubernetes into getting access to a secret, like by mounting the secret into the pod, and Kubelet will happily give it to them. And this is known as in like it's documented in on the Kubernetes documentation. So is there a effort to fix this problem, or have you seen in the tooling that there is some project that is trying to solve this?
You know what? That's an interesting topic. I don't think we covered this like explicitly. We may have made a passing remark on this in the past in our meetings or in our discussions. But yeah, I would be willing to dive deeper on this some point of time. And if you have a known link to an already existing open issue that talks about it, or if you have a docs link, add it in SIG security tooling channel and ask us like, hey, this seems relevant to you, and would you want to contribute or fix it? And let's see what folks say.
Sure, I'll do that. Yes. I mean, I tried, not tried, but it's kind of passive project now. Like I started working on it, like creating a webhook server and try to create admission review and figure out if basically doing the kubectl -as on behalf of user and trying to find out if they have airbag access to the secret they are requesting, and accordingly like denying or giving permission.
Wow, okay, that seems interesting. And hey, this is exactly what we do. Like if people need help and it's just something where the time is the limit, we'll help out and see where it goes.
Sure, I'll post it in the chat and see where it leads.
Okay, sounds good. Also, Navarun, hi, we are meeting for the first time on a call. So hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yes, you're pronouncing it right.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, Amia is saying, oh, Navarun is saying, hey guys.cc. Oh, what's that? I did not know about this. I'm gonna check out. Nice. Okay, any more questions? I am happy to chat. My coffee has kicked in, so I'm all awake now. So I can keep going, but if not, I'm very happy to have joined, and thank you for the opportunity, Suraj and Prakash.
Sure. Is there anyone who wants to? Yeah, we have